Greetings and welcome. My name is Zach Parrish, and over the next several videos I'm going to be showing you how to work with particles in Unreal Engine 4. Now before we get into that, there's some key terminology that I want you to understand. There's a lot of terms involved with creating particle systems in UE4, and a lot of them sound alike, and it's important to know the relationship between each one. The first term is going to be pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, and that is just a particle. Particle is really just a point in space. You will spawn these and then you will give them some kind of behavior. You'll make them move around in some interesting way, make them bounce off things perhaps. They can be rendered out in a lot of different ways. They can look like static meshes. They can look like a sprite, which is really just a sheet that is always going to face the camera. They can look like laser beams or lightning bolts. There's all kinds of things you can make a particle look like, but at the end of the day, it's just a point in space with some behaviors attached to it. Now the next one sounds actually pretty similar. This is a particle system. So in UE4, a particle system is the asset that resides in your content browser. So here we can see these over here inside my content browser. There's a lot of these. Now this is actually in the content examples project. Now the map that you see here may not exist in your content examples project. It's something that I actually put together specifically for this video, but fear not, because over the next several videos you're going to create all of these different effects anyway, so don't let that distract you too terribly. But what I wanted to get across here is just that in this case, here are all the particle systems available in the content browser, which of course all I did was go to the game folder, go to filters, and then filter out by particle system, so now we can see them all. Now, next term is an emitter actor. Now, let me make sure that I'm pushing down hard enough with my pen here. Emitter actor. Now, an emitter actor is the object that is going to reside in your scene that is going to hold a reference to a particle system. So if I get out of game mode, I'm going to tap the G key here. You can see these little tiny starburst icons, and these are each particle actors. You'll notice in the details panel, under the particles category, you'll see a property called template. Template holds the particle system that you want this to show. So for example, if I was to change this out from, say, the GPU sprites to the particle black bodies just sitting here, I can just drag that right onto the template property. And now this particle emitter actor is now using an entirely separate or different particle system than it was a second ago. So it's important, let me actually not hit Control S, I want to hit Control Z so I could jump back or not jump back. We could just go ahead and put the previous one back in there. Thank you. So the important thing to keep in mind there is that there is a difference between a particle system and an emitter actor. The particle system sits in your content browser. That is the asset that you create to define some sort of particle effect. And the emitter is just the actor that sits, or I'm sorry, the emitter actor sits in the scene and holds a reference to that particle system. Now another important term, as I jump back over to my special noteboard, is a particle system component. And I have to be a little careful here, because a particle system component is actually a part of the blueprint system. And I don't want to compound matters any more than I have to, but this is kind of important. If we take a look here, I've got a blueprint that I put together just to show these off. I figure if we're going to talk about emitter actors, we should also talk about particle system components. I'm going to take this blueprint and just drag and drop it into my scene. And all it's going to do is every random X number of seconds, it is simply going to spawn an explosion. And if I have to simulate it in order to watch this happen. So you see it just going boom, boom, exploding over and over again. Let's take a look at the blueprint itself. So I'll open up the blueprint editor, and let's not worry about the graph right now. I want to focus just on the components list. The only component in here is a particle system component, which I have named My Particles. You can go under Add Component, and if you just start to type particle, you'll see that. There's particle system right there. Now, if you take a look in the properties for this particle system component, you will see a template property, just like on an emitter actor. So that means this is the component that you will use to make a blueprint emit some kind of particles. All right, so let's get out of here and we will jump back over to, actually let me delete that because seeing that thing explode over and over again is just going to be distracting. So we'll get out of game mode and, actually, I didn't put an actual icon on that, so I have to delete it from the scene outliner. That's kind of funny, actually. Good, so that's all gone. Now let's, over on the magic note board, let's go to our next term, which is Cascade. Cascade is the particle editing system inside of Unreal Engine 4. Same as it was in Unreal Engine 3, actually. It's just got a little bit of a facelift. But if you're familiar with creating particle systems in Unreal Engine 3, then the transition to Unreal Engine 4 should be fairly straightforward for you. Now, to show this off, I'm just going to grab some random particle system. So let's get something a little more interesting than the ones I have prepped for this video. I'm going to go to my game folder. We'll sort by particle system. And let's look for that explosion effect that I was using a second ago. So there's P explosion bomb. I'll just double click this. And here is Cascade. Now I'll go over all the ins and outs and what you're looking at inside of Cascade in a little bit. The important thing is that you're familiar with the concept of this being the particle editor. That's what Cascade is. You can access it by double clicking on any particle system in your content browser. That is the primary means of getting to it. All right, our next term, and let's put a little divider line in here before I completely run out of room, is an emitter. That's not the same as an emitter actor. It's actually something else entirely. So let's jump back over to Unreal Engine 4. And inside of Cascade, I'm going to open up this explosion effect again. Now, in the central area of Cascade is this big window called the emitter view, or the emitters list. Now, this has all of the different emitters for this particular particle system. So each column you see here is a separate emitter. Now, this can be a little bit confusing at first. If you're totally unfamiliar with creating particle effects in UE4, you might wonder why you have all these different columns. Well, the reason that you have these separate emitters is to break apart the different aspects of a single effect. So here we have an explosion, and this explosion is actually made up of a bunch of bits and pieces. So for instance, we could just take a look at the first emitter, and all that's creating is sort of this little orange shock wave. And then the next one is just adding the fire. And the next one is adding the sparks that fly out in all directions. And then the next one's called bits, so you can see that's just some shrapnel. And then we've got a light source, which is just a little poof, and it's actually got a light module on it, so it really would be emitting some light into the scene. And then finally we have some smoke. So when you add all of these different aspects together, you get a complete effect, in this case our full explosion. And that's why you have separate emitters. That means to be an effects artist for Unreal Engine 4, you've got to be able to think of a complete effect as a group of individual aspects. So consider like a campfire. It would have flame, and it would have smoke, and it would have sparks, and each one of those things would be its own individual emitter here inside your particle system. Okay, so that moves on to our next topic, which is a module. Now, a module is a modular component of an emitter that defines some single aspect of behavior. That's a kind of a mouthful, but it's really easy if you just take a look. So over here inside my emitter list, you see all these different columns, and each one of these is a separate emitter. And underneath, or within these columns, you see each one of these little rectangular objects. These are your modules. And each module controls one aspect of behavior for the particles in that emitter. So what we'll do real quick is let's just solo one of these out. Let's just grab the bits. So I'll solo that by clicking the little S icon here. So now all we see is just the little pieces of shrapnel that are flying out. And each one of these little objects here in the list are the modules. So we have one that controls the lifetime, or how long these particles are going to live. We have one for the initial size, or how big these are going to be when they're born. Size by life, so that's how their size is going to change as the particles live. So over their lifetime, they're either going to get bigger or they're going to get smaller in some way. Now, some notes about that. There are some modules that you'll notice are the same throughout. So you have the required module that will always be there, and you have the spawn module that will also always be there. You can't get rid of those. They're always going to be present. Every other module you can add or remove as you need to. As a matter of fact, you can right-click, and you have all of the modules available for this particular type of emitter. And when I say type of emitter, that's something that I'll address here in just a moment. So you'll notice that each one of these is actually a sub-menu, so you just have to think about what it is you want to do. For instance, if you wanted to, I don't know, change the rotation of these, maybe make them spin as they fly through the air, you would right-click and you could go down to rotation rate, and you could set the initial rotation rate for these objects and make them spin as they fly through the air. Now, you can also move modules between different emitters. So we could take like the size by life and we could just drag it over to another emitter or drag it back. We could alt drag it and make a copy of it, just like you do when in most things in Unreal. You can do an alt drag to copy something, as I unsolo that for just a moment. You can also do a shift drag, and what that's going to do is copy and share the module. That means if you change one, you're in effect changing the other as well. So it's kind of a way to create an instance of a particular module. We'll go ahead and remove that and put everything back the way it was. So that, at a glance, is what a module is. Now, an important thing to note, modules execute from top to bottom. So if you have like the same module twice, the bottom one is going to overwrite the first. Generally, you don't want to do that. If you have like one color over life module, you don't need another one later. That one would control all of the color for the lifetime of the particle. So you don't necessarily need to repeat any modules inside your emitters. Again, though, the important thing is that they calculate from top to bottom. Also, the emitter list, each one of these emitters calculates from left to right, if that's important for you to know. Okay, so that takes us to our next term, which is type data modules. And type data modules control what kind of particle you want to create. These are special modules. Only one can exist on any given emitter, and you see a couple of them right here. So the Sparks and the Bits emitters have GPU sprite type data modules associated with them right now. And these that means that these are GPU sprite emitters and not just regular sprite emitters. And we'll go over the difference of those a little bit later as we create one of each of the different types, but I can also show them to you. So if we get out of Cascade real quick, I'll just minimize that for a moment. We can take a look around this scene. So here we have a standard sprite emitter, and it's kind of being a bit overshadowed by the GPU sprite emitter, who apparently wants all the attention because he's flinging particles everywhere. He really needs to calm down. But meanwhile, over here, the standard sprite emitter is just pumping out some basic sprites. A sprite is just a polygon sheet that always faces the camera. That's really all it is. It's kind of like a little picture of something. And in this case, it's just a picture of a little tiny spark that is stretching in the direction that it moves. And you'll see how to set all that up later. Now, next to this, we have the GPU sprite emitter, which is doing all kinds of cool, fun, flingy, liquidy stuff. This is very similar to the standard sprite emitter, except a GPU sprite. It's the same thing, it's just a sprite, meaning it's a picture that's always facing the camera, or a little polygon sheet that's always facing the camera. But what makes it special is at the moment each one of these particles is spawned, it is passed off to the GPU for all of its calculation. Now your GPU has a lot of processing power, hopefully, right? So if you have like a higher end, and I don't mean not super high, you can probably do great things on all the way back down to what the 400 to 500 series of NVIDIA, but of course, the more powerful your GPU, the better your gaming experience is, as I'm sure you're aware. So the GPU sprites get calculated on the GPU, allowing you to have a whole lot more particles, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, or potentially millions of particles, if that's what you wanted to try. Now, next door to this, we have a mesh emitter. These are particles that each have a static mesh attached to them. So as the particle moves around, it moves a mesh around with it. So it looks like static meshes cascading around and falling, in this case bouncing on a surface, as you can see. Next, we have a beam emitter. So this is a simple beam in this case, just looks kind of like lightning. We provide it 2 points, being a target and a source. And we've controlled not only the location of those, but also their tangents as well to create sort of that upward arc. And you'll see how to set that up a little bit later as well, as including adding the noise to make it kind of jitter and look a bit like lightning. Next, we have a ribbon emitter. Now, the actual ribbon is a secondary particle system, and again, you'll see how to set up each one of these. So we have one particle emitter. Actually, let me go ahead and just open up the particle system for this. It'll be a little bit easier to explain in that way. So we have one particle emitter, which is just creating the particles that go up in the air and fall back down. And then we have the ribbon emitter, which is creating the ribbons that follow each particle as it flies around. So you can see how that works. And then finally, over here at the end, we have some anim trails. And this required that we have an animated skeletal mesh. So I need to simulate to show that. And you can see those anim trails following his arms around in sort of a very awesome disco Queen music video kind of way. So let's jump back. You've seen all of the different type data modules. The last term I want you to be familiar with, or at least know about, is distributions. And distributions are really just ways to handle different types of numbers. And that sounds like a really complicated way to put this, but I have seen distributions really scare some people and kind of put them off. So let me go ahead and show you what a distribution actually looks like. So let's see here. Let's go over to, well, really any of these will do, but I'm kind of picky. So I want to grab this cow system and we'll open it up. And if we go to just about any of the major properties, you're going to see this word distribution pop up. And there are several different types of distribution depending on what type of number is expected. In this case, we are controlling, in this module, this is the initial size. This is the size that the cow meshes will be the moment they are born, the moment they're actually spawned. And so this is expecting a vector value, x, y, and z size, naturally. So in this case, we're going to see vector distributions, right? And what we have is constant curve, parameter, uniform, and uniform curve. Now, at a glance, what that means is constant will just be a number that you set and walk away from. It's never going to change. Constant curve is going to be defined by way of a curve. That's why we actually have a curve editor in here. So if you had like a property that needed to change over the life of a particle, say something that made these meshes get, smaller over time, then you could totally do that. So you would use something like a constant curve so that they would steadily get smaller. A particle parameter is something you would use if you wanted to talk to a parameter by way of blueprint or code or even matinee if you wanted to control something from outside the particle system. A uniform is going to give you a min and a max, and so you can then get a random number from between those two. And then a uniform curve will give you a curve, and each point in the curve has its own min and max. Now, if you would like more details than that, I highly, highly recommend, and I usually don't open up documentation in the middle of a video, but this is pretty good. There is a distributions page in the Unreal Engine 4 docs, which has some nice graphs to explain what each one of those does. So you have like a float constant, there's a constant uniform, there's curves, and you can see kind of how the numbers disperse across all of the different types of distributions. If you've never seen them before, they can be a little confusing, but don't be alarmed. Once you keep in mind what it is you want to know, what type of number you want. So if you know you want a little bit of randomness, which is what we wanted, say for the color here, we grabbed initial color, and I knew I wanted a random color. So we set the distribution to uniform, which is going to give me a min and a max. I gave it a min of 0 and a max of 1 for x, y, and z, which in this case corresponds to red, green, and blue. And therefore, I was able to get a random value between black and full color. So basically 0 and 1 for each one of the color channels, and that gives me a random number. Okay, so with that, we have covered all of the key terminology that I want you to know in order to really utilize the particle system in UE4. So you know what a particle is. A particle system is going to be the asset that sits in your content browser. The emitter actor is the actor in your scene that is going to hold a reference to a particle system so that you can put particles into your scenes. Particle system component is a component inside of a blueprint that holds a reference to a particle system. Cascade is your particle editor in Unreal Engine 4. You're going to play with that a lot as you create various particle effects. An emitter is a single column in Cascade that represents one aspect, a single aspect of an overall particle effect. So in the case of our explosion, remember we had just the fire, or just the smoke, or just the shrapnel, that sort of thing. So each one of those was its own emitter. A module is a modular component that controls one aspect of behavior within an emitter. So modules go into emitters. Type data modules are special types of modules that control what kind of particle you want to create. Do you want to create a GPU sprite particle? Do you want to create a mesh particle? Do you want to create a beam particle? That sort of thing. And finally, a distribution is a way to handle numbers in a special way. So do you want just a constant value? Do you want a min and max value? Do you want a value that changes along a curve? Depending on your needs, you will change between different types of distributions. That is going to wrap up this video. Thank you very much for watching.